All right, it is Wednesday, November 30th. And November is gone, December is here. The holidays are coming. Christmas music is rising everywhere. And we have a great guest speaker today. But before we get rolling, let's have our own John Sibley Butler.
It ain't no use to sit and wonder why, babe. If you don't know by now, and it ain't no use to sit and wonder why, babe. It don't matter anyhow. When the rooster crows at the break of dawn, look out your window, I'll be gone. You're the reason I'm traveling on. Don't think twice, it's
All right. That's a good one, Johnny.
Yeah, that's a good old song.
How are you doing today, John Butler?
I'm doing extremely well. Everything is going extremely well. In looking at everything that's going on, we can see that there is I would say, gap between, as I like to say, the real economy and
You're sounding far away, Johnny. Get closer.
Is this better?
I don't know what happened.
I don't know.
You were just fine, and now the sound is.
Dave came on, and I don't know what happened.
I don't know.
You sounded great with your guitar.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. But anyway, everything is this better now?
Turn your volume. Turn your volume up on your keyboard.
Okay, I would do that. I would do that on the volume.
Perfect.
You better.
Is that better?
Yes. Go ahead,
Is
John.
that better?
Yes, perfect. How are
Okay,
you
good.
doing?
I'm doing fine. Looking around at the world is pretty wild. You know what's amazing is that when you look at what's happened with the economy, you keep going back to supply chain. You keep going back. It seems like to me issues that we had during the pandemic, and the big question is in terms of energy and what's going on in Europe with the war. We're kind of between certain kinds of things. And at the same time, Thanksgiving came and Christmas is coming. And I think that if you look at the job market, you can see that there's I wouldn't say a crisis, but a lot of people, as we said earlier, I thought it would not last as long, but they really want to change in how they do work, which is, of course, at home. And of course, the other thing is that the opportunity structure, looking to the future, which we will always do, is just wide open. With the digitalization of things and the idea of human flight, if you will, with different kinds of vehicles, and the whole idea of cities and smart cities, there's a future that we haven't seen yet, and that's exciting to me.
I agree totally. And as I look at the data, right, and it's just interesting that the war is still going on, and you have crisis all over, and a big shift of, the digitalization of everything is shifting dramatically, creating divides everywhere. And it's really fascinating to see how there's a tug of war going on systematically across the planet. And it's really interesting. But let me jump to say hi to David and then introduce him formally. David, how are you, sir?
Doing well.
Good.
In trouble.
Well, for those of you, those listening that don't know you, let me do a quick run here. So David is the CEO and founder of Strategic Pathways, and that means you can hire David to do all kinds of things for you if you feel like it. He's been doing consulting for a long time. He's going to be with us for an hour. And in addition to that, he is a fellow at IC Square and a fellow at Tando, and a CTO at ETT, and a president of Social Care. And he can talk about all those things later. Prior to his current roles, he was CEO of HBGM and VP of Consulting at Technology Futures and Technology Transfer and Planning Manager at Semitech and Communications Manager at MCC. And he was even an assistant dean at the University of Texas at Austin. And of course, he's a Longhorn and holds a BS in Communications from UT Austin. Welcome, David.
Welcome, David. It's good to see you always.
Always, y'all too. It was a good football game on Friday, so I'm in good shape.
Yeah, I think the Longhorns have finally found their stride. Hopefully they'll go to a good bowl game. Next year there's going to be high expectations. The next year the Longhorns should have at least 10 victories, if not 12. So
if we could beat Kansas.
That's right. That's right. Now, David, you know that we in this program, focus on digital transformations, one of your favorite things, and we look at specifically smart cities markets, smart utilities, electric, water and gas, smart energy. We look at, transportation. We look at telecom and Internet of Things. And so give us a sense for your point of view of how are things shifting or changing or accelerating in the last 2 to 3 years. What digital twinning, digital divide, quantum computing. I mean, it seems like every 2 or 3 years there's some leapfrogging going on and some big shifting going on. What is the main focus of that shifting right now? As you look at all the things that you're involved in.
Well, you actually just made some understatements there. The number of changes going on in even just the last year in all those different areas. This morning, I was a panelist for the World Talent Economic Forum broadcast, which is part of the World Economic Forum, on innovation as a result of COP27 that just concluded. And, if you look at what the UN meeting on COP27 was about, it was about smart cities, smart grids, smart energy, smart transportation, all the elements which you were talking about. And what I have seen throughout my career in innovation on these is the application of group intelligence is so important to advancing innovation in these areas. What we did at MCC here in Austin, at Semitech here in Austin, was really look at how you take collaboration to the next level with using group intelligence to meet the needs. For us to work in many of these areas, we really need to take innovation to more of a group intelligence area. We've tried innovation siloed. But if I look at smart cities, if I look at grids, if I look at all the things you were talking about, those are ones where it's not just the science that's important. It's how does it work with innovation and process? How does it work with innovation and governance? How do those work with innovation built around a regulatory approach? So I cannot just innovate in technology and have the impacts that we want to have. We've got to look at how to be more holistic as we look at those areas. For example, at Semitech, we did do a lot with technology, but we also did work on standards. We worked on how to keep the suppliers going. We looked at what are the new processes that can be used to manufacture semiconductors, and even what is the science that is going to be needed 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road. In the roadmap I led the first semiconductor roadmap. And those are the things we need to do with this. If I look at smart cities, and I will give you my bias, I never talk about smart cities. I talk about smart communities because there's usually too much legacy for a smart city. But if I can take smart communities and begin to connect them, and smart communities do not even have to be adjacent. I think where you find the competencies and capabilities to link together, that's the new definition of geography. And geography is no longer just a point on a map. And smart grids, smart cities, even microgrids is how they can be innovated and used, are oftentimes not tied to geography. One of the companies that we've been doing some work with has come up with a new approach to put batteries on trains and generate power while the train's moving along, and then leave those cars at destinations to power smart grids and smart microgrids. Boy, a train moving across the country to do all that, well, that to me has a new definition of what a smart grid could be as you look at it. And I think we're going to see more and more of that, particularly as we see miniature fusion reactors begin to come to scale. And the computational and sensor infrastructure is what's going to make that all possible. So I could keep on talking about this for the whole hour, but I probably put enough.
Well, let me ask you this, David, and of course, I've been using your mind for a long time. In about 2015, we had the first conference, IC Square Fellows Conference on Social Physics, where we could write the equations before sensors.
Right.
And everybody was asking, and of course, you were one of the people that you was one of the persons that I spoke to, consulting with. And at that meeting, we talked about how data would be produced, how sensors would be produced. We had a vice president of the physicists then, and we talked about writing the equations, right, for cities, and writing the equations for the movement of people. I'll never forget the vice president said, "Let's go write the equations." Now, I think that was 2015 when we got everybody together. And how do you think, given that meeting, what we were talking about, well, Sanchez, who was a physicist, was saying, "Okay, let's start writing the equations." Where we are now, with all of the data and your idea of a community, we do that here, but we say it sits on a platform, so therefore it can be moved around and et cetera. How do you see how our thinking has progressed? And let me say this about David. David was one of the minds that helped create the roadmap for Austin, Texas, and we were both IC Square Fellows at the same time, and then I became director. So how do you see the roadmap that we laid out at IC Square going to the digital phrase, especially with the emphasis on what they call analytics and we call social physics?
Well, you know, you're so true there. And I actually even go back before. I was the Austin Business Journal in their 25th anniversary issue asked me as a futurist to look where Austin would be now. And actually, I've gone back and read that recently, and we did pretty well. The only thing I missed was that I thought that Dell Medical School would be a collaboration between two universities, not just one. But you see the elements coming there, and see, to me, the analytics that we talked with Juan and with others there, and Bob Metcalf was even in that one.
Yes.
You know, you take not Metcalf's law, but you take Reed's law, which is an extension of Metcalf's law about forming and reforming and self-forming groups. And that to me answers part of your question, Johnny, is that what we need to understand is that the challenges that we're seeing with in Austin are with smart cities or smart regions or smart countries is more of a wicked problem approach. I'm doing some projects with NASA right now, and I'm coaching all of NASA on wicked problems. And one of the characteristics of a wicked problem is that as you start to solve a wicked problem, it changes and it morphs. And it's a new wicked problem as you start to solve wicked problems. Well, what we're seeing with what you talked about, Johnny, is a classic definition of that. And you know, back then, George Kosmetsky called that system dynamics. But system dynamics today have more of a chaos theory approach to it, because I've been talking, as you know, Johnny, for over almost 25 years, that everything has become a system of systems.
Right. Well, also, yeah, I agree. And also we call it unstructured. I think that we collaborated together on the NASA project.
Oh, we did. I threw your definition in there. And now they've come back and said, coach us for 2 years. So it's really kind of fun on that one. But if you look at that, that to me is part of the answer, is that I give speeches all the time on the future of data, and we know that data is doubling every 2 years. And that's data since the beginning of history, is doubling every 2 years. But one of the challenges we have is that we're not putting data in the right ways to use it. So much of it goes into old relational databases. And I say if a company only has one database type, they're going to be out of business in 5 to 7 years. And that's the problem with the analytics you've talked about, is that we need to start putting the appropriate data in the appropriate data structures. One of the data type of bases I use often is called a time series database. We use graph databases. We use unstructured text databases, because in the real world today, still over half the data is unstructured. And so it doesn't fit in a SQL or a NoSQL type of database. And that's how you begin to do the analytics. The other thing that we need to do as we talk about that is we need to see that the types of data we're using are becoming more complex. Now, you mentioned quantum computing. I led the first quantum computing roadmap back in 1993 for one of the intelligence agencies. But the roadmap, and that one's still classified, but another roadmap I led 3 years later was the biological computing roadmap. And quantum computing is going to be great for large scale computational projects, but ones where we have to look at so many variables like we do with almost everything that's on the background behind the two of you. Biological computing, because of its multi-threading, because of the way it can take very abstract areas and connect them together. So it's the old simulation of neural networks actually applied on real neural networks and other things. That's going to be the one that's going to have the most advances for what you're talking about. Now, in reality, it's going to be a hybrid computing environment with classical computing, FPGA, morphological type computing, quantum and biological computing, doing what each of them do best, and then mushing them back together. Just like when you talk about the sensors, everything on the left-hand side of your screen behind you is driven by sensors. So you have a multitude of data formats that have to be used. But the big challenge we have with sensors and data for the analytics you're talking about, Johnny, is most of the ways we do it today are not real time.
Yeah, that's right.
And if we're going to have the impacts that we want to, we have to transition to a platform that can support real time. And for the analytics, you have to get there. And the way we need to do that is we need to start thinking and designing in the concept I call platforms of platforms. And some of the work I did in the intelligence community, I architected and we built platforms of platforms to be able for us to do real-time analytics, real-time data collection across very wide areas.
And let me one more. What I find interesting about this, I gave a talk at NASA some years ago entitled "Social Physics and the Future of Management Theory." What I find interesting about what you're talking about, when you look at, because everything comes down to networks. If you look at a social network, a biological network, and a physical network, they all look the same. That is, disease is spread in the same kind of way with nodes attached to them. I can tell you, your mother would say, "Show me your friends," and I can show you your future, right? So when I do my research, I'm reading also the networking theory for biology, which talks about the movement of diseases. I look at the physical networks for physics, and one of the things that was the guiding principles of Boston, as you know, was the old question that the Nobel Prize winner asked that we had in the group: are things self-organizing?
That's right.
And when we said, well, not necessarily, this is when we created the awesome software, ATI, and et cetera. So as we move those real abstract thinkings to the physical world and to the world of business, for example, if you look at what's going on in marketing now, it is the same kind of networks where I can say, what kind of car does John Butler like to drive? If I know what his friends drive, I'm going to do that, right? So let's talk about, as we go to cities, moving the abstract that we know very well to how cities operate. What does it mean for cities to understand networking? What does it mean for different kind of computer systems to understand learning theory and where people are going? So what does the networking have to do with, and how can it relate to the cities that we are doing now and those kind of things?
Well, you asked great questions, and one of my answers probably is going to really surprise you on this one, is that cities, and particularly academic institutions inside cities, need to understand that they're in a time of tremendous transformation. You know, most academic institutions haven't changed a lot since the times of Socrates.
Right.
And as we look at the impacts of COVID, where we've gone from that, we look at today that many of the large organizations, the Amazons, the Googles, no longer requiring college degrees. They're preferring approaches to lifelong learning. And lifelong learning is the trick that cities need to understand as you look at how to prepare your citizens for regional work. Oh, but see, regions don't matter anymore today for cities. I'm going to go back to my definition of geography. Geography is where you find the competencies and capabilities that you need to be successful. But cities want all those competencies and capabilities in the city core, and do not understand that linked competencies and capabilities rise the boat higher for all, where oftentimes if you try to go back to the approaches we used in the past of everything within arm reach of the city, it just, we're not going to where this century is going. We're still living in the last century.
Let me comment on that before I bring Andreas in. You know, Joel Cochrana's book, another IC Square fellow,
right.
The End of Geography, right?
Yeah.
So he brought to the table that we have the end of the geography, but we did not have the census. Everything was not sitting on a platform.
Right.
And I find it fascinating about college graduations and going to college. Now, as they say, for full transparency, I am a fourth generation college graduate, and my family never associated going to college with getting a job, right? They associated going to college with networking with different people. Relationships. And then, as you know, when we were kids, General Motors trained their own engineers.
They did.
They trained so I think that what
you have and GE did. You go and look at what IBM did. They had their own programs that said college was necessary but not sufficient then. And we're seeing that change as the whole ecosystem changes.
But as we move forward, as President Johnson said, he wanted an LBJ school because he learned politics off of a wagon, and the Kennedys learned it at Harvard. Going forward, then, you know, you can say that the who runs America, and traditionally college was associated with the Ivy Leagues, right? And then it spread out. So you don't want a situation where, like in my case, college is really necessary. Since 1900, we haven't lost one who did not finish college, right? So you don't want the elite running the country while all the other people are just workers. So I think what college does is allow the elite kids to interact with other kids, to think about things in another way. But it has been absolutely true forever, as we like to say, the A students are hired by the B students, right? And then the C students do the work, and the D students have the buildings named after them. So I think
you're right.
I think we need to think about that as we go forward. But I really like the idea of the transformation of cities, and I think you're bringing to the table. We've talked about that here. We're sitting on a platform. Dallas can be Houston. Houston can be Dallas. We're moving that way. I don't know if you remember when we were back in the day when Cisneros was in Washington. He told one of the senators, "Well, Senator, Rice is in San Antonio," and the senator said, "Wait a minute, I thought Rice was in Houston." And the mayor said, "Well, we're moving that way," without knowing due to the transformation. So I like the idea of preparing cities so that enterprises can do well in the context of those cities. See, I always tell Andreas as we go forward at 512 CMG, we keep the business models. So my last question to you is this. At one time, paving the roads was a smart city. And one time, getting red lights was a smart city. What can the new technologies that we have done so well contribute to business enterprise, whether it's regional, whether it's out in space? How do you see that building new companies?
Well, I'm going to go back to what I think are the key elements of the smart communities.
Okay.
Because if I'm in a city, yes, the city provides the roads, the city provides access to utilities.
Now it's digital. Yeah.
And a lot of them digital, but yet I still need the fiber optics to get it there. But if I begin to look at what smart communities are going to do and how smart communities are going to connect to other smart communities and to corporations and academics are going to tie into them. And that network effect of taking these smart communities, bridging them into the commercial marketplace, bridging them in, Johnny, remember, to the Technopolis concept?
Yes.
Technopolis concept is very important for smart communities, smart cities, in that too many smart cities say, how can I, as a municipal government, control everything?
Right.
And that doesn't work. You need to use the Technopolis concept that Kosmetsky pioneered and look at how to use the network effects from that, how to use the human capital group intelligent concepts from that, but then also how can I leverage that on a broader scale than what is in the, pick your number, 2,500, 150 square miles of the metropolitan concept. Because if I look at even the cities that you talked about there, from Houston, San Antonio, Austin, Dallas, I'm going to have to throw Waco in here now too. I see none of them having all the competencies and capabilities that we need. But if I can network those 5 together, I have the vast majority of the competencies and capabilities we need to be successful in Texas. And I think that is the key to your answer there, is that we need to, just like when Texas came together to recruit the MCC consortia, when we came together to recruit the Super Collider, which ended up failing, Sematech, others like that. Even the big.
So let me jump in, guys.
Okay.
Let me jump in and kind of try to tie a bunch of things and see if we can dive a little deeper into some details. So clearly, you guys are aware of the Saudi Arabia announcement about a year or so ago about the linear city and all the things that they're building around that, right? And I remember when the phone rang and I was sitting at Austin Energy in 2008, and a bunch of guys working for the United States called me up because they were assembling an advisory team for the United Arab Emirates, and they were building this new city called Masdar, which is a 20,000 people city that was built in 2009. And that was my first foray into what was happening and understanding. Obviously, they wanted my advice on grid stuff. And it's really fascinating that it seems like, when you look at the construct of the planet, right, we are a geopolitical thing that is being superseded by a corporate thing, and corporations are global in nature, right? And there's a shift of control, and a shift of productivity, and a shift of GDP influence that is moving from geopolitical to corporations, right? But I think the next wave is basically the dismantling of that And you guys are talking about smart cities, smart communities. I think of it as this ongoing waves that don't stop. And you can think of it as smart chains from supply chain, or smart waves, or smart tribes, or smart groups, which is basically the logical alignment of capabilities to create competitive advantages to go after markets. And there are three things that are fundamental there, and and I'll close in a moment with a couple of questions for you, David. So it's not just technology innovation, but it's policy, right? The rules of the game, sort of, kind of, right? But it's also in ultimately what Johnny loves, which is business models, right? So policy, business models, and technology all need to transform in unison, right? To build this next generation. So I go back to one in particular that I like a lot, which I think is the most relevant mega trend. And let's talk about that one and see if we can dissect a little bit what's happening there. So mobility as a service. So mobility as a service is basically, we're going to take transportation as we know it today, add the gig economy to it, Uber, add artificial intelligence, cloud computing, mobile computing, edge computing, add energy, electrification, control systems, broadband, telecommunications, right? And all of a sudden, you have a new paradigm of, at least within the United States, a country built for cars with big roads, so the tanks can go across and move, right? To a country that is going, moving, but not just horizontal, but vertical, in an asset base that is colliding all these forces. So when you look at Army futures and the Air Force and the NSA and the CIA and transportation in the future and technology with all kinds of computes, David, am I into something here that society at its core in the United States is being reinvented, even though we're not thinking that way? And who is working on this and who's driving this?
Well, you've asked such a compound question. I'm going to have to disintegrate it a little bit to answer it.
Yeah.
Let's start with the front side of it. Yes, all those technologies are moving. I think the movement to edge of cloud, even though we're calling it computing, is more about sensors. It's edge of cloud sensing that has become smart. And that we're seeing that edge of cloud smart sensing computing becoming more of a node type of cluster approach that is going to let us drive those type of transformations you've talked about. It's kind of like if I look at how the ecosystem for manufacturing is changing in front of our face right now. We were into the big, I'm going to call it big box manufacturing. Is it like big box retail, where we went to China's, we went to places where we could do low cost, and we forgot the whole concept of how it supports a region, how it supports a country, how it builds capabilities for the citizens. Well, we're now going back to that transformation. That transformation going back to where we're saying we need to look at how do we create the best environment for innovation? How do we create the best environment for transformation? And that's what you kind of need to do. One of the companies you mentioned earlier with ETT is we have a company that teaches social emotional learning using 3D conversational avatars. Well, that type of approach is going to transform part of government. Let me take a conversational avatar and use it to provide my government services. Let me take it to provide education. Let me take it to be able to provision that mobile transportation you're talking about. I often now are taking my car, parking it in East Austin, and I'm taking Uber or Lyft all around town, just because our city council has decided they don't want anybody to park downtown anymore.
Yeah.
And that's why everything's going to the second and third and now fourth city centers to get out of downtown. But you begin to look at, well, how can I make that differently? You know, I feel fortunate that I have friends who live down there, and I can park in their driveway in their front of their house and do that. But going to things, meetings coming up and things, it's harder and harder because we are still a good ways away from smart transportation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to take a while to get there. And even as we look at electric vehicles, you know, some of the presentations I've attended, some of the dialogues I've been in, and I led the battery high energy density storage roadmap for the military. So I kind of understand where we're going with energy storage. Is that most of the EVs we're producing today are going to be throwaway cars.
Mm-hmm.
When it becomes time to replace the battery, a replacement battery far exceeds the cost of the vehicle frame at that time.
Right.
So, you know, is that smart transportation or is that a transitional transportation?
Mm-hmm.
I would argue for you that electric vehicles, the way we know them today, are not smart transportation.
Right.
Even if we begin to move it down an autonomous approach. I think we will eventually see a hybrid approaches where we have fuel cells in it, where we use hydrogen in it and other approaches like that. I actually think we might even see radioisotopes be put in transportation, particularly long haul trucks and things, as part of the mix of using energy to be smart transportation. Now, long haul trucks and that type of environment, they're going to become extremely smart very fast. We're going to go to at least level 4 autonomous driving on trucks. So rapidly, our head's going to swim.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to see that on the highways. The shared cars of smart transportation makes sense in places like New York. I just was in LA for a bunch of meetings. You know, just keep me off of 405 or I don't know what I'm going to do. But even then, we're going to have to look at different approaches of a pure terrestrial approach. There's one of the companies I'm on the board of that is using a quantum approach to transportation propulsion. And it's using quantum angular momentum. There's a fantastic view because it's non-polluting, doesn't take a resource to do it. And it's a really neat quantum approach. But that's, you know, that's still years out, and getting just the funding for that right now, as they're going into their commercialization path, is always a challenge. Because transportation today doesn't have a good roadmap. Smart transportation does not have a good roadmap.
Yeah.
We're throwing things against the wall to see what can stick, and there's not a plan to make it into a circular economy. You know, today a circular economy is what we need for transportation. You know, it's not just getting it there, but what do we do at end of life cycle? How can we take those things and put them back into use? How can we create that circular view that is necessary if we're going to meet, for example, any of the targets from the Paris Accord?
Right.
Well, David,
So
yeah,
let
go
me
ahead.
real quick, let me make this point and see what you think about it. So I talk a lot about in our program about the challenge of moving from, you know, the energy transition journey, right? And by the way, for all those listening, and you if you never have before, all the energy that we're using in the planet comes from the sun and is energy storage from the sun, including oil and gas. And if you want to know more about it, just call me and we can discuss it. but if you take the electrification of transportation, which is upon us, and it's going to happen because the genie's out of the bottle and there's a lot of money chasing it. We have 22 million registered vehicles in Texas. ERCOT as a grid only produces or delivers 80 gigawatts of energy at peak. The 22 million vehicles with 100 kilowatt hour battery each will require 2,200 gigawatt hours of energy. How do we help the government and the politicians and the people who promise votes to understand that there is no way in hell that that's going to happen.
No, and you look at states like California, they're even worse shape than Texas is.
Mhm.
And that's the challenge, is that we're not thinking about it in a roadmap sense. We're not thinking about it as a closed loop process, which it really needs to be, that circular economy approach. You know, circular economy really started gaining traction within the last 2 years. And it's one which I think we need to adapt more and more into our governmental based planning process. And, you know, we have in industry and in science using the concept of digital twins for quite a while, even though there were times we didn't call it digital twins.
Mhm.
We need to pull the digital twins concept into what we're doing for governance. And I will call that the government, but governance today is so much more because we have so many NGOs, non-governmental organizations, who are actually putting regulations in place. They're making regulatory decisions, even though they are NGOs.
Mhm.
That the environment is such that we have to look broadly at that type of collaboration. I'm going to go back to what I said at the top of the show. We've got to begin to use our group intelligence to understand this as a systems of systems. Most government bodies have no idea even what a system is,
Mhm.
much less what a system to systems are. And you cannot take smart cities, grids, energy, transportation, buildings, utilities, and deal with it as a standalone component, because they're all systems of systems. And until we get governments and NGOs and commercial companies to work together, and academics to work together to understand that what happens in part of a system influences the other parts of the systems of systems, we're going to be less than optimum in any type of solution we can put in place. That's why a road mapping process where you're looking not just at technology, but you're saying what are the skills that are needed? What are the competencies and capabilities are needed? What are the raw resources that are needed? What human capital do I need? Those are the elements that have to go into it. And that goes back, you know, I mentioned George Kosmetsky earlier. That was some of the key concepts of his Austin model in the Technopolis, was pulling all of those elements together. George and I, with George's playing with Dan Golden, we designed the NASA Tech Transfer Centers as we were going between Austin and DC and back with them. And that was the concept there, is if you look at NASA is nothing but a huge system of systems. And they work with so many different regulatory agency bodies, governments, commercial. They can't manage it as a linear problem. We can't manage the things you're talking about on just as a linear problem. Those days are long over, but yet that's how we govern.
Well, let me ask you this. I'm glad I wasn't on that plane when the door blew off. Oh, yeah, you remember. Let me ask you this. Let's go back to transportation. The fact of the situation is that the Saudis will not run out of oil. In my generation, your generation, your kids' generation, your great kids' generation, your great great kids' generation, your great 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 kids' generation.
Norwell, Texas.
Norwell, Texas. So what does that mean for the circular economy? And what does that mean for the environment? And does that mean from a realistic point of view? For example, the state of Louisiana will no longer invest in companies, that's not petroleum friendly. So how do you see all that? And how do you see all of that coming to a head when the reality of the fact that everybody might want electric cars, hey, but we can't make a move? Or the fact that electric cars are throwaway cars and you can't trade them in anymore. You just throw them away because you want to buy a new battery. It's going to cost you $60,000. How do you deal with that reality?
And how do we deal with the waste from all that?
Yeah.
You know, you think we have junkyards today? Wait till we start disposing of all these electric vehicles at the end of a decade.
Wally.
Oh, that's you're there. Let's get Wally here. That would work. But see, we're not thinking through the problems. We're looking short term, politically ideological, without understanding the impacts. And that has gotten us in trouble in so many different ways over millennial, not just recently, but if I go back and look at history, history has taught us that dooms us to failure on those type of ideas.
Mhm.
And that's where we need to look at new models. We have the ability now to do large scale simulations, the digital twin stuff, like I was talking about earlier, on a mass scale, that we shouldn't be having problems like this. We should have known that the electric vehicles were going to become throwaway vehicles.
Mhm.
And we should have been able to structure the manufacturing of those in such a way that that was less likely to happen. But no, we rushed time to market. We did a minimal viable product straight into a production without understanding any of the futures. And Johnny, there's a reason why the windshield in your car is bigger than the window at the back. It's more important to see where you're going than where you've been. But yet most companies today, most governments take it the other way around. They're more interested in where we've been than where we're going. And the pace of innovation, the pace of change today, the globalization today is so rapid that you've got to look further and further out that windshield. You've got to look beyond where the headlights are shining.
Right.
And
I wonder, Dave.
that's what as a futurist, that's what I've gotten to do really well, is look 30, 40, 50. I've done roadmaps 75 years in the future now.
Let me ask you guys a quick question, because I think one of the interesting things about what we're discussing, which is kind of 30,000 foot level, but I want to land it and see if you guys can come up with some suggestions for the audience. So clearly a lot of transformation, a lot of this innovation, a lot of trends to leverage. Where can we make money today? So give both of you, give me, from AI to cloud to energy to telecom to 6G to 5G to EVs. Where is the money to be made in the next 5 years? Where are some of the key spots where if I had $1 million, $10 million, what should I be doing with that just to build a new company?
That sounds like a Butler question.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, go ahead, Dave. You can go first if you want to.
Well, I'll give you my quick feedback on that. There's also questions in chat about Industry 4.0, Industry 5.0, and stuff like that too. Industry 5.0 is a political industry, where Industry 4.0 is an IT-centric industry. So you've got the Industry 5.0 is going to be all about sustainability. But to answer your question, I don't care if it's 5G or 6G, or if it's using photons of light in a coherent manner to communicate. Communication is going to be very important. I think we're going to very rapidly move beyond radio frequency as part of our way to communicate. And we're going to be seeing free space optics become more common today. If I go into space, that's how the military communicates, satellite to satellite, is free space optics. We're going to have to do that here to get the bandwidths we need and to get rid of congestion.
So that would kill licensed spectrum.
That would open up licensed spectrum. Yes, it would kill it as a monetary source. And there's something called Li-Fi, which is photon-based Ethernet that can be used in offices and things just by adapting your fluorescent tubes to Li-Fi. It's a fantastic area because it makes it less acceptable to hacking. Our biggest problem that you talked about on this is not the technologies. It's the human element that makes them open to bad actors. with privacy, with hacking, with stealing access. And we're just not smart with the way we do that. You know, if I want to go and use those photons, I know the speed of light out to how many significant digits. And if I want to secure a communication link, let me just make sure that my lasers are only coherent at those two distances out to the 28th power. And anywhere that's not there, it's just noise, it's just light. We can do that with what we have today, but we choose not to. Because other companies are making too much money to transition that way. We have the ability to solve so many of these problems. I mean, you know, when Johnny was with leading IC squared, when Kosmeski was there, when we saw so many others, we looked at how to solve problems with not just the current infrastructure, but where we saw things changing in the future.
Right.
And how to pull the elements together. We're not doing that today.
Right.
We have to go back to being intelligent with understanding this. And what the big change from when Kosmeski and Johnny ran IC squared to where we are today, because I'm going to go back to that point again, is we're today, everything is a system of systems. And if you think today, almost every device that takes power is now intelligent. Where in that time they were not. So how do we take all these intelligence devices, all these intelligent feedbacks? You know, I can now, and this is a scary concept to me, I now have enough sensors where I can tap into Johnny's infosphere and understand what's happening inside of his brain.
Yep.
In real time without having to physically tap into it. Now that's a scary concept, but we're at the path for being able to do things like that. So we're going to have all these feedbacks, we're going to have all this data, but we've got to look at how to use it in a way that has impact. Record data without impact is stupid. Because
yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, Dave.
Say one last thing. The chain we have to remember, and then this is a lot of the work I did in the military and the intel community. You start with a source, then you go to a sensor, the sensor turns into data, the data turns into information, the information turns into knowledge, and then once you have knowledge, it goes into wisdom. But if you don't have action at the end of that, that whole chain means nothing. And you've got to go through that chain to be able to affect change today. And we collect a lot of data, but we don't turn it into knowledge, wisdom, and action. And the key, you ask for the advice to people is don't stop with data, turn it into knowledge, particularly wisdom, and then action. Wisdom says, I'm not confined to my domain. I'm not confined to my inbred knowledge set. The world is so connected today, and things from one vertical to another vertical to another vertical all work pretty much the same. Let me pick out some vertical to get to that wisdom. Let us drive action, because you know you've got to get there with the pace of change we have today.
Right.
Johnny?
Dave, speaking of that, and I just put it in the chat session. I put the technopposite in mathematics using big data. And I wanted to ask this question.
That's a good one.
And I put it on the chat if you want to open it up and take a look at it. It was published in one of those journals where 200 people will read and nobody else will ever see it. Okay. One of the top journals in management. So what happens, Andres, is this. Science has always created wealth and well-being for people. So the question that you're asking is, and I have always started in the Kosmeski tradition, that wealth creation and job creation starts with science and technology, and how we come together and create wisdom. And from that wisdom, we create real companies. So if you look at how we built Austin, it was based on science and technology, military, DoD data. What I found important in this research is how, David, collective people who think alike, like to be around each other.
They do.
You know, they want to be around each other to create the next whatever have you. So one of the great things that Kosmeski did with Austin was not only when Dale became prominent, when Jim Tressard, who grew up with us with National Instruments, became prominent, right? It was the old collecting of people together who would solve problems, and from the science and technology, new enterprises will evolve. So we talked a lot here on this program about all of the enterprises that came out of the pandemic. But I tell you what, a lot of the technology was not designed to do what we did with it.
No, it was.
You know, I taught here, right, at my house, but I rather a technology where I could go to the board. I have maybe I would have a studio in my own house and interact with the students. I want to walk down the hall with a company and talk to someone. So I think the making money is going to all be related to those who understand how technology increases jobs in the Schumpeter point of view, and how creative destruction creates jobs. Because when I finished undergraduate school at LSU, and when I finished PhD at Northwestern, none of those jobs that we have today were here.
None of them.
So can you imagine what's going to be like in the future when Andreas continued to look at and tie things together with sensors? Data analytics will be big. Marketing will be big. And how we do those things will provide so many jobs in the future. And of course, we will play differently. Games will be differently, right? We will order our food differently, right? We will have 3D printing. So Dave, you might go to, say, I need a rake. You order it and you print it out at your house.
You're right.
All of those things are very, very interesting. So Andreas, I think if we follow the science, as science create businesses themselves, we can't get stuck with the notion that management, accounting, and finance is where we start. Right. One of my things that I think about, I was a professor in China. In China, 70% of the kids are majoring in science, and in America, they're majoring in business. So I think that we have to look at those kind of trends and say, what does it mean for job creation in the future? But if we follow the science, America, when I was in Japan and I would turn on my computer and it would say Microsoft, I felt so good, right? It didn't say anything. And the students around me from Japan and China, it also said Microsoft. And once we lose the science, then we could lose our competitive kind of edge.
Yeah.
You know, Johnny, that's so true. Back when we did MCC and Semitech, you know, we spent a lot of time discussing just that in Congress. When I was designing InQtel for the CIA, and we were in hearings with HPSI and CISI, we talked a lot about the science that was needed for our intelligence community to succeed today. And we've got to go back and understand those. But let me just say one thing, it's not just the science. Where we as a country have failed with some of the science, we forget the processes that need to go with the science. We forget the human capital that needs to go with the science. And we've got to look at those together. We as a country have failed to produce adequate human capital that understands lifelong learning. And we have failed at that today. But that's a model that is so critical for this country's future, is to understand we're in a time of lifelong learning. And, you know, the fastest growing segment in the workforce today is people 65 and above coming back into the workforce. And you see that because we understand how to work with each other, where some of the younger generations do not understand that yet. Even though they grew up in a digital community, they don't know how to work with each other. And that's going to be one of the keys to being successful. But we've got to get the human capital problem fixed.
Now, David, last question real quick, and I know we're over, but I want to see what your take is to this. So there's a new self-imposed mega trend called ESG, right, around sustainability.
That's right.
Is that hocus pocus? What do you think? What's the lifespan of that mega trend, and you know what is the impact of it short term?
Well, number one, you hurt me calling it a megatrend.
Mhm.
I am not a fan of megatrends because it simplifies it too much. But ESG is a concept that is driven by politics.
Mhm.
And it helps solve it helps solve inequalities, which is good. It helps put focus on it, but what it does is it lessens the ability for management to manage companies.
And I'm not sure that it solves inequalities. I don't
Well,
think
I
it
don't
does.
think, I actually don't think it does
I
either.
think it takes away the agency for people to,
I agree with you.
yeah,
It creates less than optimum solutions. How's that a way to put it?
I like
Because
that.
it doesn't solve the problems it was there to solve. Now, what you need though is you need a leadership group who has the responsibilities that falls as part of the ability of it. But that is seen today as a trump card. And I think that's wrong. I mean, the goal of leading a company is to have a successful company.
Yeah.
And if things like that get in the way of having a successful company, then it's going to push those companies other places.
I agree. I totally agree. I think that it is I mean, it's like one of those dolls that you buy for Christmas, where, you know, you get all excited and then it goes away. Okay.
So Johnny, last question for you. Is capitalism under attack, or are we in the verge of an explosive wave of capitalism like never before?
We're on the verge of an explosive wave of capitalism. I don't see anybody trying to go to Cuba in a boat. I don't see anybody trying to leave America and go back to South America. I don't see anybody trying to go to Europe. America is still the most creative country there is when it comes to making money. Now, the idea of how capitalism has evolved is very, very interesting. Schumpeter said that it would destroy itself. But with all of the mechanisms, and the key to it all is this: if you look at how well people have done in America, how well they have done, 85% of them came from the lower working class. The still thing about America are the dreamers, and how, whether it's flight, whether it's computers, whether it's smart cities, whether it's sensors. And I think that capitalism is alive and well. I think it has always, from the beginning of Marx, but this is what Marx did not understand. Marx talked about the importance of profit and how profit was stolen from the working class. But profit is not profit in the sense of profit, the accountant's profit. Profit is the cost for surviving the future for new technologies. Put in very, very simple words, if I had a typewriter company, when we switched to computers, if I had the profit, I could buy a computer company. So profit is not profit, it's the cost for competing in the future.
Well said, well said. Well, David, parting thoughts, but what keeps you up at night? What are you up to in the next 90 days? Where are you going to be? Any conferences, anything you want to plug?
Well, I grew up from my grandparents, and the very best business advice I ever got from my grandfather is, if you're not in trouble, you're not doing enough. And I think that's great business advice, and I've lived my life by it. So I'm doing things across multiple industries, multiple segments, helping companies start up, particularly international companies today. Our company ETT, which is a holding company. We have our healthcare platform, our social emotional learning education platform. We have a platform on land logics, which is land management, and we have a hospitality platform that we're all bringing to market. I want to see those succeed. I would like to, Johnny, see one of those become another Dell type of company down the road. But we're seeing them because we have a social responsibility. Economic Transformation Technologies, ETT, says we're not just trying to serve a commercial purpose. we're trying to look at economies and how to transform economies as well. That to me is kind of the future of where we're going. You know, I'm speaking at Innotech coming up here. I'm speaking at, got a number of conferences. I speak every week for the World Economic Forum, the World Talent Economic Forum. And, you know, I just have a blast because I believe in lifelong learning. And with me going and participating in these, having to prepare for them, working across the different areas, even doing this project I mentioned earlier with NASA on wicked problems, that's what keeps me young.
Right.
And that's what we need to do. But for your listeners, that is my biggest closing remark, is you've got to stay in a time of lifelong learning. And you have to work with others to share that. And that's where group intelligence, if Johnny and I just collaborate together and learn together, our knowledge increases linear. If we can begin to use group intelligence, it increases to the log. And what we need today is we need to increase our capabilities to the log to solve the problems we have with all these smart elements, to solve the problems in the system of systems world. Because that's
from multiple logs, which I will call smart waves, to logical smart chains, to smart tribes, to ultimately smart groups, and to last but not least, smart systems.
I agree. Smart systems of systems, and I agree with you.
But Dave, it's certainly good for us to sit here and see how Austin was playing. And I think Kosmeski drew Austin in 1976. It looks just like that now.
It does.
And I'm telling you, it's just amazing to me. And we spent, I spent, you know, every Wednesday 3 hours with him in the morning, starting at 6 o'clock, I might add. But his vision for the future with the Science City, you know, out where MIT used to be, we're doing the University of Austin now. And it might be that we're just starting on a new revolutionary kind of innovation. It's pretty wild.
I love what you're saying there because I love the meetings with Kosmeski, except when he wanted to be on the airplane at 4:30 in the morning.
Yeah,
but that kind of killed me. But you know, what I also see though is what we need to do as Austin, since this is an Austin-centric program here, is we need to understand that even when we work with each other here, that our capabilities and knowledge is defined by how we can mentor others, how we can work with others, how we can pull together the resources. I'm going to go back to my terms I use often, competencies and capabilities. And, you know, it just that the three of us, for example, we all believe in mentorship and working with people. I have been mentored by fantastic people my entire career. And, you know, if I learned this much from my mentors, I learned a great deal. And we need to go back to that. One of the things that COVID did is it killed our model of actively collaborating with other individuals. We've got to get back to that. And we've got to see how to make music with each other.
Well said.
Well said.
Thank you, David, for being
Thank you, David. And hold on.
Take us away.
Got a feeling deep down in my soul that I just can't lose. Yes, I'm on my way. Made a friend, yeah, my baby said, you know, I'll be there until the end. Yes, I'm on my way. Mighty glad you stayed. Okay.
Woo! Well said. Well said. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.